all. This is Dr. Mobeen Sayed with my favorite guest, Paul Bork, and we're going to talk about COVID stats and then disability stats. So, Paul, welcome and take it away.
Thank you very much, Mobeen. First, we're going to talk about the disability, actually. The summary, just in case someone has to get out quickly, it's all quiet on the COVID front. The pandemic is not over. We're getting more disabled workers, and we still have some people getting hurt, but it really is not much different in the overall than it has been before, but the details are a little different. And now we're going to Fred here, as you can see up here.
And tell us once more, as you were telling me before, what Fred meant.
Yeah, Fred is the, up here, it's the Federal Reserve economic data. So they had quite an imaginative group get together and spent months probably figuring out what the name was, but that's what Fred means. These gray periods are recessions. A recession means 2 quarters in a row where the economy is contracting. A depression, that's differentiated, is much, much worse. And the basic definition is for something to become a depression, there needs to be a 10% reduction in the whole country's output, or it needs to continue for 2 years, the contraction. So there's an awful lot of room between something just being a recession and becoming a depression. But it was kind of interesting because during the Great Depression, the terms actually were reversed, where a recession was considered horrible. And the government kept saying, it's not a recession, it's a mere depression in the economy. So anyway, the changing in words go on. So this is a graph that the Federal Reserve have put together, and you have here their period of recession and then the short recession, and we haven't had one for quite a period of time. And so what they're charting here are the people between, I think it is 16 and 65, who are in the workforce as designated by either having a job or getting unemployment, and the disability among that subgroup. And you can see that it has been moving along fairly well. And Mobeen talked about this already. I suggested a little deeper dive if people were interested, and we found some interest, so here I am. I divided this same graph, but I divided this into 5 different periods. If you notice, there's a downward sloping here and an upward sloping here. Don't think that has anything to do with COVID. Don't know what that was. Don't care. It isn't relevant to what we're looking at here. But just taking the upward slope here, so this period 2 is going to be the background for talking about COVID, and whatever was happening here in period 1 is something else, and somebody else can talk about that. You see the red lines divide the periods. Then we have period 3, which is COVID. Period 4, which I'm viewing as an adjustment because the slope here is different than the slope is in period 5. And period 5 is the new normal, or at least as far as the data we've seen. And the slope looks like it's going fairly consistently here. As you can see in the period 4, the slope, I actually took the slope here in period 2, the baseline. And these other 2 green lines have exactly the same slope. I just duplicated the arrows and moved them over. And you can see that that growth of the disability, and here is the number of disabled persons in thousands. So this is 6,400,000. And so here in period 5, you can see it's coming back towards the same thing. It looks like we're getting more variation. So maybe something new is going on that the data won't really support figuring that out. But anyway, we're taking a look. And so what I've done is divided those and taking a look, assuming that these 2 slopes are the same, which they aren't. But if they were the same, this black line is measuring the difference from this point to this point, just vertically. and moving that over here so we can measure it, it goes from 6 million to 7,650,000. And so that's the number of additional disabled people that we had. If we take this period 3 and 4 and cut it out, the number of disabled jumped up, and then the slope is pretty close to the same going forward. So here, this data would show that they're associated at the same time as COVID, perhaps due to COVID, perhaps due to vaccine, perhaps due to something completely different. This is not a causation. This is simply looking at economic data and looking at what happened at the same time. There's, again, 1.65 million people that are additionally disabled, starting with the 6. Now, this graph has hidden the 0, which really distorts the emotional appeal. If I go to the next here, see, this is exactly the same slope, but I put the 0 in, and you can see the huge variation really isn't as great as it appeared there. So this is actually what you should take from if you're really looking at the data. And one of the things I always do when looking at it is I want to see it graphed with the 0 so we can see how much variation we're talking about. And so you can see the disabled here, it looks, even on the 2 periods, one coming down and one going up, it looks relatively flat, and then something else is happening here. And again, it looks more like one line could sort of fit it here, but that's why we go to the back to the other, where we expand, which just multiplies the variation, so we can see that the slopes really are different in these 2 things. It's easier to see. So that's what I did here. Then taking a look at the slopes, I downloaded all the data points, all of them, and put the data points here. This is the baseline period, which, to go back to my graph, baseline period is period 2. And you can see the dates here, January 2014 to January 2020. And the last period is essentially June of 23 to January of 25, which I guess is when the data ended. And so looking at this, you have more data points, so you can get a better curve, but you can see they're saying that the stepwise moving of just one after the other, the order of the data points, not looking at the dates, but just looking at I think this is weekly data, and they're all set just 7 days apart. But this correlation, I just put the data 1 through whatever, each of the data points is, so each step moving one at a time, that explains 65.53% of the variation. So really only have about a little, you would round it to 1 data point, which would be 70%. And that seems a little cheating, but that's what you'd look at. 70% of the variation is explained just by the change in order. And the slope is 10 extra people disabled for every data point moving over, or every week, 10 more people are disabled.
So, Paul, there is a good question. A. Perry says, I must have missed something. How did the Federal Reserve find COVID injuries? Why would that organization look into that? It doesn't make sense to me. So
yeah, they didn't. They looked at a change in. They're looking at disabled people. They're looking at financial data, and we're looking at it and say, "Oh, I know something else happened during this period 3 and 4." We're applying that.
Understood.
The Federal Reserve is not investigating COVID at all.
They're just saying, here is the data of people who are disabled. We are saying, oh, this looks like after COVID, so there must be reasons there as well.
Right. And I don't think either Mobeen or I are saying this means COVID caused it. We're just saying it occurred at the same time that a lot of other things occurred. And for example, one of the things that this would say is if someone said, oh, there were 20 million more people disabled in the country because of COVID, you'd look at this and say, no, the number is 1.65 million people more disabled during this time than what would be expected. So again, this can be very calming, or it can be alarming depending on where you come from. If you assumed, oh my gosh, everyone stayed at home, fewer people getting hurt, fewer people working, there must be fewer people disabled. Well, the data isn't there to support that either. There is a little downward slope here when COVID first came in and the inactivity, but then it jumped back up. Was this just a reporting thing that people were disabled and they were getting disability equivalent from COVID payments, so they didn't file in the disability system? Could be. You know, we have no way of knowing. This is just the Federal Reserve tracking disabled people in the working group of America, which is 16 and over. I think they stopped at 65. Actually, this says over, but looking at the chart, I think it was 16 to 65. So workers over 65 are not counted in this database. So I believe
And
it, but you're
neither
right.
anyone injured below 16 as well. They are also not counted
Right.
here.
And but they're also, yeah, they're not counted because this is not percentage. This is just number of disabled people.
Understood.
And again, I don't know the database. Farming is usually the highest risk business, and a lot of times they're excluded from a lot of the financial data. So I don't know if farmers are included or not. But it's a very good question, and they are not. The CDC or Federal Reserve is not looking into COVID. They're simply reporting the same data they've been collecting, you can see, for a long time. And if since we're looking at COVID, we say, oh my gosh, what happened with your data during COVID time? So we're the ones that are sort of added that overlay to it. So if we go back here, and then I take a look at the post-COVID, which is this period 5, the last one. And statistics, look at my R squared, 0.05% of the variation. So this says there really isn't a pattern. You can't call it a pattern. But if you could call it a pattern, it says that we are now having fewer people injured than before. Before we had 10 people, or excuse me, 10, but these are thousands, 10,000 people a week added. And this says that it's now 6,000, so a 40% decrease. But again, with this R squared going from 60 or 70% to 5%, I would say I would be very reluctant to say anything about the slope here.
Makes sense.
And certainly not say it's different than this one.
And could this be that there are the number of people who are getting injured or long COVID isn't the same level as it was before? Plus, maybe there are people who are getting disabled, but there are some who were disabled and now have fallen off of the workforce, or
right.
have.
And again, this is looking at the stepwise thing. If, for example, California only reports people for long COVID that are non-disabled only get reported every 3 months. We get the 1, 2, 3. We get this sort of up sloping. So there may be some reporting thing that's going on here, particularly if we have vaccine injured or long COVID patients that are getting non-disabled. The reporting may be periodic and different than the people who have, a broken leg or a strained back. So again, hard to say, but this low correlation tells me there's something else going on here. And is it that we're getting, because something is going on that is different. And what is it? I don't know. We have these 3 going up, these 3 going down, these 5 all seeming to be in a downward slope. Why is that? Is there someone that's reporting a cure for something and they're, making sure it's there? And so we had some significant cure and we get this over 5 weeks, you mean? And maybe the other data would be more going up with the slope. And these 2 going up, these 4 going down, these 4 going up, these 3 going down. These 3 going down, these 3 going up. Why is it not 1, 2, 1, 2? It's the grouping just looks like it's a reporting error. Excuse me, reporting error. It looks like they're clumping the reports together for some reason. I mean, I'm not saying that that's wrong and it isn't following protocol or whatever, but it appears that, and here in this data, you seem to have somewhat of the up and down still. And so again, maybe there's something that's going on in how the data is collected or reported or qualified or something. You may have some states that get people on their unemployment because of disabled, fired and on unemployment because of disabled get reported in different groupings or something. Again, it would take a lot of effort to dig into that, and I certainly have not cared enough to look into it. But just seeing this, I'm thinking that the underlying data is probably more, it has a better correlation coefficient than this. And this is almost like it's just a random plot, and that's very difficult to find in real life, particularly when there's an overwhelming underlying understanding that the number of disabled should increase from week to week.
Understood. Thank you very much.
The other thing I did, which is even more speculative numerically, is I took a look at the intercept here, okay? Because we started both of them at 0 and said, given the different slope, how much did they start with? And is this a difference that occurred because the number here is higher? And so the other slope would be up here. And so again, looking at the intercept at 0, how much of a difference? And this says 2.5 million, which isn't a great agreement with the other number that we had that we measured, but it's not substantially different, the 1.6 million. It's in the same order of magnitude, and so that means probably gives you a little more confidence. I would rely on the 1.6, but this doesn't say, it looks like the 1.6 is just flat out wrong for some reason.
Understood.
Okay, any other questions? I'm about to leave this Federal Reserve data.
We're good.
Okay, here's the CDC. I have this line here that's parallel, and again, I can copy it and move it around and it'll stay parallel. This is the change in percent test positivity, how many positive tests versus how many COVID tests that are given. Got this lump, we got a little bitty lump going in, and it's easy to look at the magnitude here and say, oh my gosh, that's like 40%, 20%. But if you look at the area under the curve, this is like 10%. And so the total number of people that are testing positive is much lower, and it's much lower than even looking at the altitude of each of these curves are. This is the trend in percent of emergency department visits. So this is taking the total emergency department visits and dividing it by the number of COVID emergency department visits, not people with COVID, but people who are admitted because of COVID. We have a very similar curve to the positivity, except we've got this funny little bump up that occurred here. There's something that happened. We either had someone referring more cases. We had a news article that told people, hey, make sure you come to the emergency room if you have COVID, or something happened for that blip. I don't believe it's a blip in the disease itself. I think it's just a blip in people showing up, or people with emergency room getting an extra, $10 if it's a COVID. And so questionable cases fell one way or the other, or something happened that went here, I think. This is the hospitalization rate that is due to COVID. And you can see the hospitalization rate is a lot closer to this old peak than the positivity, and a lot more than the emergency departments. So people going into the emergency room are way down, and not so much for the people that are getting hospitalized. So what that may mean is that the folks that are really severely hurt by COVID are, as the variant classes change, this new variant is almost as harmful as the prior one, but the urgency and having people go into the emergency department versus just being hospitalized is less. And then if we take a look at COVID deaths, the COVID deaths is even less than hospitalization. So again, why would hospitalization be up if the real serious COVIDs are down? Might be that people are treating it better. Might be any number of things. But also notice for each of these, the base here was not reached at this area. And why could that be? It might be that the new variant came in quicker this time than it did before. So if we just look at the one variant, maybe this curve comes down here and started, and this other curve would have ended. And so if this had been moved further over, we would have a lower point before the next variant strain or class brought the positivity, hospitalization, deaths, or emergency department visits up. So I don't think this is saying that overall it's getting more dangerous. I just think it means that these two variants were active and effective in infecting the population with less of a time difference between them as what occurred in the curve before.
Understood. Thank you.
Here's the variance, and you can see overall, this is the slope, and each of the variant classes have much less variant. The vertical is the number of changes, mutations, and this is just time. And so in each mutation or each variant class, we tend to have a fairly slow level of mutation, and then we jump when the next variant class comes out. This is exactly what we've seen all the way along. Remember the curves here and here. And again, going from zero, which wasn't the beginning of COVID. That was the beginning of the first one that was sequenced. The disease was out, it was running around, it was doing whatever it does before, but we weren't measuring it, so we don't know what that was. But you can see that the slope is much, much, much less variant in each of the classes than overall. So we really have two things occurring in terms of immune escape. One is the variant class itself is mutating a little bit, and each mutation makes it a different variant, but they group them together so we don't have a 10 million variants. But we get the major changes occurring. And how does this occur? Well, we look here, this is where they call the different strains and the different classes coming in, and they do this jumps. These are the two current ones. And you see all these other attempts did not dominate or are not dominating now. All this other stuff, all the group down here, they've all essentially died out. BA2 and all the ones down here, the only JN1 that survived was the one that came up here. And the one that went to J143 and the KQ1, that didn't work. So all these are gone. These are essentially, if you view each variant class as a species, these are species that are extinct. Can't compete. And if they came back today and were exposed, they would be outcompeted by these current ones because each one is better. Now, it may be that just because it's beating the guy that beat this one, maybe this old one would work, but I think probably not. But these are the two, and again, these are the two variant classes that the FDA was asking them to put in the vaccine. So I think most of them had the JN1, and so you're quite some way genetically away from what the current COVID is. But that's how they jump. Okay, then this is the current one. You can see where they're going. This was a month ago, where the green was going down and the orange was coming up, and it was XCC and LP 8.1, LP 8.1, XCC, and XCC is just becoming dominant. Now again, this is where the data ends. This is the data for new infections, not the average of all the people with COVID. These are the nowcasts. This is based on the data from a month ago. This is what they forecast it would be today. But they aren't. But it takes time to collect the data. So this is not data. This is a estimate of what it was going forward. And if you remember, we tracked some of them to see how good their forecasts were based upon, going back a month or so and seeing how well they projected, like how well this JN1 would grow. They're not very good in predicting it. So this is as good a data as we have with a nowcast, but we saw sometimes they were off by 30, 40% in terms of the growth that occurred. So, and they have it labeled as a nowcast. They put a gray box around it, and if the CDC is listening, I think that's fine. They're marking it as not real data. They're making it very apparent, but they're making it available if somebody wants to use it. So I think that this is being very fair and legitimate in how they do it. And literally, if this were the live thing, which it isn't, and I clicked on this week, it would show all the numbers for the week. So, they're not hiding any data. This is just reflecting that they're not spending extraordinary money and effort to get going from data to getting the projection right away. And this probably allows them to get more samples analyzed and do it under a less rushed and better procedure, and probably save a lot of money on it. But anyway, so the nowcast, I'm saying people need to understand it's not a real, it's a forecast to today, and that's why they called it a nowcast. But I think this is an appropriate way to deal with it, and I'm glad they do it. And you can see they even have a second gray box around the current time frame, and they label it here. So again, I think they've marked that particularly well.
Good. Thank you.
And again, I put the two little circles here because those are the same color circles that I have here based on their coloring.
Makes sense.
The other data that we have is based on the sewage data. And these are the data points. As you can see, this part of Michigan has a whole bunch of data points, and not very many in South or North Dakota. And Louisiana seems to have a whole lot. They have a lot of water. They probably have more effort in the wastewater system from the state that's driving it. California has a whole lot, not much, nothing in Guam, I don't think, or Puerto Rico. And DC got blown up to be an area here. If you remember, the politics of reporting for DC was really important to some of the politicians in DC. And now it looks like they don't have any data reporting at all. So maybe the federal money ran out or something. I don't know, but this is the data. These are the data points, and this is the data. Again, they did what we suggested, and probably a lot of other people suggested. They had 10 different categories. It's way too many to deal with it. They've gone down to 5. They put this in the low category. I moved it on here so the graph could be bigger. They made it separate, but puts it here. They say that it's in the low, not the very low. And remember, we looked at the data, how they decided what was low or very low, and they deal with COVID differently than influenza and differently than other diseases. Here we have sort of a downward slope looking at this data point and these peaks coming down. And then if we only look at the last 3, it looks more like this. They're both going to having a point right over here where the data, the peak and the trough will end up coming together. I don't think it's going to be a zero COVID that we're heading towards. We're heading towards it just being endemic, or low level of infection that's just everywhere. And that happens with a number of things. There was a doctor that came to work for the company I was working for, and he had a report that he wrote before but got published after he got hired with us. So I did a legal review to be sure he didn't say something that was embarrassing. Of course he didn't. But what was interesting is he was looking at people going on to oil rigs and looking at flesh-eating bacteria. And he said, not only, and the question was, can we sterilize the people that we fly in so we don't have any flesh-eating bacteria, and we have essentially a secure bubble on the drilling rigs, because the people come out every 2 months or so, and they're here for 2 months. And we've had some problems with people getting injured, and then we have the flesh-eating bacteria, and it's antibiotic resistant, and we're having to go back to the 1950s wound treatment because the antibiotics don't work. And can we just, sterilize everyone? And he said, no, you can't do it, because not only did a lot of the people have it, he found that some 40% of the workers had been colonized with flesh-eating bacteria. So we have it on us all the time. And I don't believe the population there in Louisiana was substantially different than the rest of the country or the world. It's there. It's just very rarely causes trouble. COVID will probably become something sort of like that, where it's always around, and the amount of trouble that it causes will be severe for the people it causes trouble for, but will be just viewed as a normal ongoing thing for most of the rest of us.
Makes sense.
And looking at this line here, see, I drew the line coming up a little bit because these, again, the valleys look like they're not going as far down, and I think that's because the new cycle is coming faster. But it looks like it's coming up a little bit. And so I asked the question, is that important? Look at this R squared, 0.00007. That's about as close to zero as you can get. There is no, the troughs going forward saying that there's some incremental increase or whatever that's going on. The data says no. It looks like it to my eye, but the data says, nah, it's random. So going back to this, I would, it's saying that from the data here, all of these troughs are essentially equivalent to being exactly flat. And so just the peaks. We get the peaks down, we'll be in good shape. Okay. And here's my last slide, I think. No, second to last. Again, still oscillating. Some people are getting sick. Some are dying. Fewer people than before, which is very, very good. We have new variant classes coming out. Reinfection can occur because we have the new variant classes. And I've not heard of any change in treatment protocols. Long COVID and vaccine injury cases continue. Actual risks are uncertain. The only data I had was, again, from the Tim Spector, the Zoe App guy, who was a MD, PhD from the UK, said that as far as he could tell, roughly 10% greater chance of vaccine injury every time you get the vaccine, and every time you get COVID, you have a little more chance of getting long COVID. So again, it's over, still dangerous for some, and a little uncomfortable for everybody or a lot of people. Unfortunately, the sum is getting smaller and smaller as time goes by. Again, looking at the death, it's half as many under the one curve as the prior curve. And so it's going down and continuing to change. So the effect is slowly decreasing, and it's slowly. So it seems to be well behaved and heading the way that we'd expect. If you remember, I looked at it before, comparing its lethality with a mild or middle of the road case of influenza, and the lethality of people admitted to the emergency room was about 1.4 times as much. It's going down. So now it's probably about the same as that year I picked. So they're roughly equivalent in terms of the danger of someone getting hospitalized. Not talking about getting COVID and getting pneumonia versus getting in the hospital, but saying of those that are in the hospital with it, it looks like it's really no more severe than pneumonia, which unfortunately most of us have seen people and dealt with them over our whole lives that have gone in. And so this is roughly the same in the danger there.
Understood.
So that's what I have.
Awesome. Thank you very much for pulling the data together, presenting it, and especially the disability data as well. So thank you so much for presenting.
You're quite welcome.
And Cool Beans, thank you very much for tuning in and listening. I will come back soon, not today, but with another talk later on. Thank you and have a good night.